from Harvard Square in Harvard Yard. And along with me, this is Tom Reardon, and along with me is Ed Carey. And Ed, it's hard to believe a year has gone by since we were here.
I just saw you last week. It's flown by.
Well, I was just remarking before we went on the air that when I first came here, Ed's class, the class of 1955, was celebrating its 20th reunion. They were virtually children at that age. They looked a little old to me, but they were still children. And here you are now, 20 years later.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
20 is 40. I'm feeling just fine, thank you.
Well, that's, of course, the condition that so many of these alumni find themselves, that these years fly by, just as the period between last year when we were sitting in this little treehouse and this year again.
What we're looking at now are some of the Radcliffe people gathering in the yard. You can see the leaders of each group, like the class of 1925, should be behind that sign. Hopefully they are. This procession will run right up in front of Widener and come down the center aisle. On the steps of Widener right now, we should have the president of the university along with the chief marshal and his aides. That's the class of 1970. Doesn't seem possible. They are the 25th reunion class.
The class of 1970 was not an easy period in the university's history, or it came at a period that was not all that easy. It was deeply divided by the war in Vietnam, and yet it's been very interesting that this year's class is probably the biggest return in terms of a 25th reunion in recent times. The class of 45 has been an extraordinary class this year, at least in terms of the enthusiasm and generosity. It is unparalleled, as Bob Stone will be reporting today. But this was not a class that you would expect to necessarily be terribly cohesive. You had people at various ages and stages of life, and yet it has been, I think, a very successful reunion. And from all reports that I hear from the people participating in it, and of course Bob Stone is a member of that class.
And there's the chairman, Bob Storer, just going out of your screen on the left.
It has been a stunning success as a reunion, I think. You're looking at the stage where still many of the dignitaries are at the back of the theater along the steps of Widener reviewing the procession as it comes along, and then they will come down as a group and along with the overseers, honorands, and others to fill in the seats along the stage. It's always more intense when you have a head of state on hand, and well, somebody said to me, who could possibly be in opposition to President Havel? Unfortunately, the world we live in, somebody can be in opposition to virtually everyone. Would that were not the case. But security that I thought, while visible and seen to be large in numbers, was in no way intrusive or burdensome to the alumni or the graduates or graduate families.
Not at all. I walked right through the yard. No one approached me. They had their dogs out, and they were just...
I think that's a perfect balance. If you can manage to have high visibility security so that you discourage people from doing stupid things, while on the other hand, not in an environment where clearly the feeling is festive and it's one of family, not suddenly become so onerous that people have to be stamped and ushered and ticketed and... well, they do need tickets. I do think that there has seemed to be reasonable flexibility in this. After the morning exercises, Ed, which end generally somewhere between 11:30 and 12 o'clock, the theater empties out. And what happens at that point?
Well, if you're an undergrad of Harvard College, you proceed with your family to your house, whether it be Cabot House or Elliott House or Dunster House. And at that time, you are given your degree by the housemaster. It's a much more personal event. It's all taped now, I understand, and the tapes are available. But that's what happens. They go back there with, grandma, grandpa, brothers, sisters, and have lunch. And then they come back here. The graduate schools go back to their respective campuses, like the medical school, the law school, the business school across the river, and they have a like ceremony. This morning's exercise having run a little bit late, I think we'll have a good number back. It'll be interesting. They'll probably be coming in a little bit late too. But I hear the bells ringing in the Memorial Church. So.
And the platform is beginning to fill up now, as you can see people coming up. Historically, is there a good return from parents, families, and undergraduate, new graduates, or do they tend to stay down at the houses?
You know, that's hard to tell, Tom. I think it depends. A lot depends on, things like even like weather, how far they're going this afternoon, are they staying on? People like to you got to remember that this is the end of 4 days of celebration, if you will, and that's been costly. I'm not talking about monetarily. It's just been, they gotta be a little bit tired now.
Well, only relatively recently did they begin announcing who the commencement speaker would be. It was always a big secret, as all the honorary degree recipients are always a big secret. But I think they decided a number of years ago to change that and actually announce in mid-spring who the speaker will be in order to encourage people to plan so that they might return. So I suppose who the speaker is may have some impact.
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. We are seeing the corporation and overseers and the honorands coming in now. We're just approaching the stage. There's Mr. Louis Kane, chairman of his class of 53. Paul Weissman, now pointing with dark glasses there. Former chairman of the Harvard College Fund.
There's Murray Howe, who's the chair of his 50th reunion.
That's right.
And did an extraordinary job. There is
one of the
Lou
award
Appel.
recipients, Lou Appel from York, Pennsylvania.
That's right, and one of the
Class of 47, being just Fred Glimp to his right on the left of your screen. Class of 50, who's also having a reunion, his 45th, I might add. And that's another recipient who was talking with Fred.
That's right, Bill Oates, who
escaped me for a second there.
That's all right. That happens.
Well, this
as you
happens.
come up on these
40th reunion, exactly.
Well, the procession has either just about ended or dissipated. I am not sure which, but it seems to be
I think,
just about at an end. And milling around the podium, there's Charles Schlichter, who is stepping down now as a member of the corporation. And after years of distinguished service, he must have been on the board 25 years, I would guess, or more.
Must be.
I'm not exactly sure when he came in.
As if he's been here for a good number.
I think it goes back to the early 70s and possibly just before that, so that an incredible...
There's Linda Wilson, President of Radcliffe.
Just to go back to finish, the commitment required of a corporation member, there are only 6 of them plus the treasurer, is really extraordinary. And they devote 1 full day every other week all year long, and for which there is, of course, no fee, and an enormous amount of responsibility on one hand, and I think a very demanding, tough set of issues that they have to come to grips with. All institutions today are not faced with simple problems, and ultimately the buck stops with them. And Charles Schlichter has been an incredibly dedicated servant of Harvard for many, many years. With his back to the camera, the man without the high hat is Barry Williams, and he is the president of the Harvard Alumni Association. And he is the man who I assume will call us to order shortly.
Well, he's an imposing figure. He was quite a basketball player when he was here. He has degrees from the college, the business school, and the law school. So he covers a multitude of constituencies.
He's been a very dedicated Harvard supporter and leader for a long time now, both as head of the Alumni Association, as an overseer, as a member of any number of committees that have dealt with the governance of Harvard and the structure of Harvard. So a person who whose term I hate to see end. But the one thing about the Alumni Association is when your term is up, you go into this sort of president emeritus status and you stay on the executive committee. And so we seem to see a fair amount of people, unlike overseers who unfortunately go off and then you tend to lose track of them. And there are some wonderful overseers retiring today who have given so generously of their service, of their time, of their intelligence, and I hope that we'll be able to keep them involved. I think quickly of John Lithgow, who has been just terrific in terms of revitalizing the arts, in helping to increase and enhance the presence of Harvard on the West Coast, a person who I hope will continue to stay deeply involved, as all of these departing overseers who are really an extraordinary lot. Now we'll turn the festivities over to Barry Williams.
Welcome to the 1995 annual meeting of the Harvard Alumni Association. My name is Barry Lawson Williams, and as president of the Harvard Alumni Association, I am pleased to help preside over this afternoon's activities. The Alumni House, Wadsworth Hall, provided me with 3 instructions for this afternoon. The first instruction was, be brief. The second instruction was, despite your attending Harvard, please be brief. And finally, and most important, was number 3. Always remember, under all circumstances and conditions, be brief. I will abide by those guiding principles. This morning's procession and ceremony celebrated the achievement of approximately 6,000 graduates who received their degrees today from the college and the graduate and professional schools. This afternoon, we gather here again today, this time to celebrate the returning alumni, to hear reports on the university and on the university resources, to welcome the new graduates into the diverse and interesting group of 250 persons who make up the Harvard Alumni Association. The procession, which just concluded, represented those 250,000 alumni and alumni who are found throughout the world. Now, many have traveled today for their class reunions that you saw in the procession. 12 classes in all are celebrating their reunions today. And I would like to report that a record 250 classmates and 520 people in all are celebrating their 35th reunion today. "375 classmates are celebrating their 50th reunion. And another record for highest participation, approximately 700 classmates are here celebrating their 25th reunion. I'm most happy to report that the oldest reunion class here this year is the class of 1930, and they have gathered to celebrate their 65th reunion. This reunion is chaired by the Reverend Harold Sedgwick of Lexington, Massachusetts. Congratulations to all the classes and reunions. And thank you for the insights, the leadership, the creativity, and the fun you bring to alumni life. We thank you for contributing to the continuation of the Harvard experience for both alumni and students. I have a few individuals, and we cannot do them all, but a few individuals that I'd like to recognize who are important to alumni activities as well as to all of Harvard. I will begin by recognizing the individual elected by his classmates to be the Chief Marshal of the 25th reunion class, the class of 1970. This year's Chief Marshal was president of the Crimson as an undergraduate, where he majored in American history and literature. He was staff writer and editor for several publications prior to his present position as Washington editor for the Atlantic Monthly. He won the American Book Award in 1982. I present you with the 1995 Chief Marshal, James M. Fallows. James, will you please stand? I'd now like to recognize and honor the two leaders of our alumni procession. The oldest alumni is a tough standard. Our previous person had been to 81 Harvard reunions when he attended Frederick Crawford last year and was 103. This year I'm proud to say that the oldest alumna is an alumna, and she is here from Newton Center, Massachusetts, a member of the class of 1920, 95 years old, Evelyn Bard Hoffman. And just 1 year behind her, the class of 1921, 2 weeks away from his 94th birthday from Florida, Abe Sperber. Continuing in my recognition of individuals who have made contributions this year and many years to the Harvard alumni programs, whose contributions have been invaluable, I'd like to mention just a few more people. I would like each to please stand and be recognized after I call your name. The president of Radcliffe College, Linda Wilson. The president of the Radcliffe College Alumni Association, Joy Fallon, class of 1978. The dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, Jeremy Knowles. On behalf of the Alumni Association, we'd like to recognize and thank the Executive Director of the Harvard Alumni Association, Jack Reardon, and the Vice President for Alumni Affairs and Development, Fred Klim. And with pleasure, I'd like to recognize and introduce next year's president of the HAA and this year's first vice president, Champ Lyons Jr., class of 1962. Finally, I'd like to introduce a retiring member of the Harvard Corporation, and a person is here celebrating his 50th reunion, Charles Schlichter. Harvard alumni take an active role in the university by electing the members of the Board of Overseers and Directors of the Harvard Alumni Association. I am very happy to announce the result of this year's election. Please hold your applause until I announce all the names. I will announce them alphabetically, and elected as overseers to serve a 6-year term are Dr. John C. Baldwin, Houston, Texas; Mr. Peter C.B. Bino, Chicago, Illinois; Mrs. Sharon E. Gagnon, Anchorage, Alaska; Mr. John Harrison, Atlanta, Georgia; and Miss Lisa Henson, Culver City, California. In addition, elected as directors of the Harvard Alumni Association to serve 3-year terms, and again I will do it in alphabetical order, Mrs. Teresa Alvarez Bjellen of Norway, Ms. Jill Chang, Brookline, Mass., Mr. Glenn M. Johnson, Chestnut Hill, Mass., Mr. Thomas H. Perry, Los Angeles, California, Mr. David J. Vital, Chicago, Illinois, and Mr. Michael G. Yeaman, New York City. I congratulate them all. The Harvard Medal is awarded each year by the Harvard Alumni Association for extraordinary service to Harvard University. The Alumni Awards Committee of the Harvard Alumni Association reviews hundreds of recommendations and selects 3 individuals whose long-term devotion to Harvard was truly exemplary and inspirational. A description of the 1995 recipients and their many, many contributions to Harvard is in your programs. President Neil Rudenstein will now present the 1995 Harvard Medals.
The first medal is to a native New Yorker, lifetime alumni leader. You have been a staunch friend and loyal advocate for the university, cultivating the enduring ties of college, class, and Harvard Club. Louis J. Appel, Jr., class of '47. The next, 2-term overseer, renowned public servant, and Harvard-trained economist. You have demanded high standards and supplied robust results. Andrew F. Brimmer, Ph.D., 1957. Finally, hewn from the land of Mount Rushmore, your monumental service to education and to this university is indelibly etched on the Harvard landscape. William A. Oates, class of '38, AM 40, CAS 67, EDD 68.
I would now like to call upon Robert G. Stone, Jr., class of 1945, an individual well known to Harvard alumni, friends, and supporters, for the annual report on university resources. Bob has served as chairman of the Committee on University Resources and a member of the corporation since 1975. He is currently on the board of the Harvard Management Company and has served with distinction on countless committees. He chaired the Harvard campaign of 1979 through '84 and is now one of 3 national campaign chairs for the university campaign 1994 through 1999. Bob is truly a person who leads by example.
President Rudenstein, President Wilson, President Havel, distinguished guests, fellow alumni, particularly the class of 1945, and ladies and gentlemen, just over 1 year ago, Harvard launched the University Campaign, an unprecedented effort to bring together the Harvard community and structure the university to meet the many demands and challenges that lie ahead. As I report to you on the campaign today, its importance has never been more clear to me. I speak to you not only as a chair of the Committee on University Resources, but also as a member of the 50th reunion class, which arrived in Cambridge at the beginning of World War II. This historical perspective, coupled with the presence of President Havel on the stage, makes me acutely aware that we must take a long-term view in preparing Harvard for the future. When my class arrived in Harvard Yard, the world was undergoing a great transformation that is still in process. Who then would have dreamed that after a long and costly struggle against totalitarianism, we could say with pride that the president of a free and democratic Czech Republic would be with us here today. During the next 50 years, Harvard will be called upon to respond to equally momentous changes. Of one thing we can be certain: Harvard needs financial stability if it is to be an educational leader for our emerging global society in the future. Harvard has remained such a leader because alumni, past and present, have been so generous with their time and resources over the years. And to all of them today, we say, well done. Now the Harvard campaign is succeeding in laying the foundation for this vital fiscal stability. The campaign has been successful not only as a fundraising exercise, but also as a blueprint telling us precisely what Harvard will and will not do in the years ahead. The campaign is not a wish list of our fondest intellectual dreams, a consensus among the faculties regarding the resources needed to sustain and extend Harvard's reputation for excellence in the future is what it is. This campaign is also very much about leadership. It's been gratifying to see the younger alumni stepping forward to take over leadership positions from those of us in the old guard. It is a commitment that we deeply appreciate. Thank you. Let me now report on the campaign and introduce you to some of the extraordinary people who are making it succeed, because that is the real purpose of this address, to thank those who are contributing truly heroic efforts on Harvard's behalf. First, I should like to tell you that the campaign total as of today is $908 million and still climbing. It is also gratifying to note that this success is not concentrated in any one school, but rather that each of the faculties is doing well and meeting its campaign goals. For example, as we meet here today, the Harvard Law School is approaching the conclusion of its part of the campaign, and what a job they've done. The law school, with a total of $148 million raised, has set a standard for the rest of the university that is nothing short of inspiring. This total is just about 3 times the size of any campaign ever completed by an American law school. The law school's success must, of course, be attributed to many people. But we would be remiss if we did not take a moment to thank Jack Cogan, a 1949 graduate of the college and a 1952 graduate of the law school, for his extraordinary leadership. Jack, will you please stand? The success of the campaign also depends upon donors who understand its goals, and we have recently received a generous gift that perfectly symbolizes the university-wide nature of the campaign. I speak, of course, about the $70 million given to Harvard by John Loeb and his wife, Peter Lehman Loeb. The Loeb's longtime connection with Harvard and their deep understanding of this institution led them to make a magnificent campaign gift that will benefit the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, the School of Design, the School of Public Health, the Loeb Drama Center, and the Memorial Church where we are today. Finally, let me describe how the campaign is affecting the college and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. The FAS goals represent nearly half the campaign total. It's a major challenge, and we've made terrific progress towards meeting it. I'm pleased to report that FAS has raised $375 million so far. Jeremy? David McCord, class of 1921, the legendary former executive director of the Harvard College Fund, once called the fund a network of friendships. Today, that network is expanding as never before, thanks to the campaign. The fund has become part of a larger organization, including the Parents Fund and Graduate School Fund. An FAS campaign organization is now at work through major gifts committees around the country and the entire Harvard College Fund force of nearly 5,000 volunteers. We have with us today several of the key leaders of that effort, all of whom serve as FAS campaign co-chairs in addition to their other duties with the campaign. We begin with Paul Weissman, class of 1952, who is also chair of the Harvard College Fund. Paul, will you please stand and be recognized? The other two FAS co-chairs are also on the stage with us today. Louis Kane, class of 1953, and Catherine Loca. Louis and Catherine, please stand up. And John Nichols, class of 1953, is down at his daughter's graduation at Mather House, but he is chairman of our whole Midwest effort. When we look at how alumni have responded to the campaign, we see something new and different happening. Standards are being set that go far beyond anything we've witnessed in the past. Reunions remain central, but every class is helping us meet the goals of the campaign. Many classes not celebrating this year are already surpassing previous levels of giving. The campaign is generating a momentum normally felt only at reunion time. I would very much like to recognize each reunion class and its chairs individually, but I am of course limited to reporting on just a few. Let me ask that you hold your applause until this part of the report is completed, and then we will acknowledge all those leading their reunion drives. First, we look at the class of 1975, celebrating its 20th reunion, and which has raised $4,350,000. 3 times the amount given by any previous 20th. This class is led by Dick Cashin, Paul Finnegan, and Tom Foley. Celebrating its milestone 35th reunion and guided by Paul Buttenwieser, Joe Pellegrino, and Peter Solomon, the class of 1960 has raised $9,200,000, surpassing the previous high set by the class of 1959. The class of 1950, which is, of course, the class of Fred Glimp, Harvard's Vice President for Alumni Affairs and Development, is led by Rod Nordblum and Tim Yee. On the occasion of its 45th reunion, 1950 has raised close to $12,500,000, more than 5 times the previous high. The class of 1940, with Bob Glazer at the helm, is celebrating its 55th reunion by doubling the previous standard with $4 million. The class of 1935, led by Elliot Shapira, has more than doubled the highest total for prior 60th reunions, with $4,300,000. And the class of 1930, under the leadership of Brownie Brownell and Monk Mason, with $5 million raised, has nearly quadrupled any previous 65th total. As I said, these are just a few examples of the great job that is being done. At this time, I'd like the chairs of all the reunion classes to stand and be acknowledged as one. Finally, I want to make mention of 3 classes that are each unique in their own way. We must, of course, say a word about the 25th reunion class, the class of 1970, which is seated here on the stage with us. The first 25th reunion class to operate fully within the campaign environment. They've returned to Cambridge in record numbers and are helping to show us the way forward. Graduating at a time of great change in our country and the world, they always strove to be different, and their approach to the 25th is no exception. The first class to create a home page on the World Wide Web. They have been innovators in organizing their reunion. Ably led by Chairs Tom Hill and Chaz Phillips, this class has raised over $5 million, a giant step on their 5-year campaign journey. Tom and Chaz, will you? Now, on a personal note, I'm extremely pleased to tell you about the class of 1945, my class, I'm prejudiced, which is here for its 50th reunion. We overcame many obstacles in our day even to function as a class, and under the inspired leadership of Murray Howe, we've leapt over every barrier to success. Superlatives fail us as the class total has risen to the most money ever raised by any class under any circumstances, period. Our total is $17,800,000. Murray, would you please stand and be acknowledged? Oh, there you go. That even got a smile out of Dean Knowles. Before I recognize the final class, let me leave you with this thought. There have been over 28,000 college donors to the campaign this year, and many more donors university-wide. This show of support is wonderful, and yet somehow, with all the cutbacks that are threatening us, we must continue to do more. With potential reductions in other traditional sources of funds, the contributions of alumni and friends are becoming absolutely critical to Harvard's financial well-being. Dollar numbers are certainly important, but what really matters is that each and every one of us finds a way to participate in the drive. The campaign is about academic goals, and it is about raising money, but it is first and foremost an opportunity for the entire community to prepare Harvard for the next century and beyond. I hope you will join us, because that is what makes the campaign significant to you and me. It's a way for us to participate in creating Harvard's future. And of course, Harvard's future is here today, represented by the class of 1995. In response to a challenge from the Harvard College Fund Council and the Parents Fund, senior gift participation has zoomed from 50 to 65%. This impressive result is largely attributable to the untiring efforts of Dahlia Loeb and Tyler Leshney. Dahlia and Tyler, would you please both stand? Thank you. And so if we succeed in our goals for the campaign, a speaker from the class of 1995, perhaps Dahlia or Tyler, will stand in this spot 50 years from now and on our work here and say to us, hopefully, well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bob. We are all grateful to you and the people who work with you for your contribution to the university. Please greet the Harvard University Band, which will perform Harvardiana. My notes indicate that it's time to introduce the 25th president of Harvard University, Neil Rudenstein. You've been here all morning.
Short.
It would be extraordinarily difficult to be brief in trying to introduce President Rudenstein. However, during the past almost 4 years, many of us have had the privilege to hear and observe President Rudenstein on many occasions. We've therefore witnessed firsthand the extraordinary impact that he is having on the university. Hence, you will join me in concluding that I'd rather hear directly from President Rudenstein than from myself talking about his background. I'll be very brief, therefore, on his background. A Princeton graduate, class of 1956, a Rhodes Scholar in Renaissance literature, saving grace, a Harvard PhD, class of 1964. It gets sketchy. A faculty member at Harvard, dean and provost at Princeton, executive vice president of the Mellon Foundation, and finally, Neil Rudenstein came back to Harvard almost 4 years ago as president. In that short time, he has led the university to better understand itself and its role in the future. His accomplishments, his intelligence, his strength of character have earned him the affection and admiration of the Harvard community and alumni all around the world. Particularly at this time, when higher education is facing great demands, we are fortunate to have the leadership of a president who has a clear vision for Harvard as a university now and for the future. I am very pleased to introduce the 25th president of Harvard, Neil Rudenstein. That
was terrific. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. And thank you, everyone. This has been listening to Robert Stone, listening to everyone else, watching the honorary degree recipients today. It's been an ebullient, inspiring, warm day, and I think the rain will stay away. I'm glad to have Barry noted that I had some connection to Harvard after that litany of other associations. And today I really wanted to go back 50 years to remember for a moment the end of World War II, 1945, when one class here today was graduating. At that time, the occasion was similar, but really quite different. The mood was different. The war had already come to an end in Europe, but was still going on in the Pacific. The commencement audience was only a few hundred, and it took place, the commencement, in the small quadrangle near Seaver Hall to my left. President Conan explained that there were still more than 25,000 Harvard graduates and students in uniform. He told the audience that this was a purely local gathering because of the restrictions on wartime travel, and the whole activities of the day were condensed into 2 hours. And yet, in spite of the smallness, I worked hard to get my speech down to that. It was still a day of affirmation. Interestingly enough, the principal speaker that day was Sir Andrew Fleming, the renowned English bacteriologist, scientist. It was Fleming, you remember, who in 1928 had discovered penicillin, and it was penicillin that had saved thousands and thousands of lives, not only before the war, but especially during the war, a war in which so many Harvard students, faculty, and alumni served with courage and distinction. Interestingly enough, though, Fleming did not on that commencement day, even though the war was raging, talk about conflict or destruction. He spoke instead about the importance to society about scientific discovery, something that he knew quite a bit about. He talked in a very unassuming and personal way, and he talked about the role of chance, or serendipity, as he called it, in research, as well as in his own life. As a young man, he'd been working for 5 years as a shipping clerk because he had no money. He couldn't afford the medical education he wanted. One day, fortune intervened. A relative who he scarcely knew died and left him a fair amount of money, enough to launch him in his medical studies. He spent the money on education, earned his degree, served in World War I, and went on to a career in biological research, studying bacteria. Within another decade, fortune intervened again, and this time Fleming was working in his laboratory. I did not ask, he said, for a spore of Penicillium notatum to drop on my culture plate, he said. And when I saw certain odd changes taking place there, I didn't have the slightest suspicion that I was at the beginning of something extraordinary. That same mold spore might have dropped on any one of my other culture plates, and there would have been no visible change at all. However, something happened, and suddenly everything began to fit in. There was an appearance which called for investigation, with the result that now, after many ups and downs, has led to penicillin. Well, why did Fleming tell this particular story at Harvard on that particular commencement day? He said he wanted to offer some advice to young researchers in pursuit of knowledge. Never, he said, never neglect an odd or extraordinary appearance or happening. It may be a false alarm and lead to absolutely nothing, but it may, on the other hand, be the clue provided by fate to lead you to some important advance. We can also see from our vantage point now that there was another kind of significance to Fleming's remarks. He was already helping to shift our focus from the war that was ending to the peace that was just about to begin. His own personal experience reminded everyone that research and discovery could lead to dramatic and unpredictable advances for society and for all individuals. In fact, as we know, our own nation began to invest heavily in basic and applied research during the war years, and then afterward. Our major universities were seen as senior partners in this enterprise, not only in research, but in the training of graduate and professional school students in many different fields. We need to remember, and it can't really be stressed enough, because we often only think so often about undergraduate education, which of course is crucial, but we need to remember in a university advanced education for graduate and professional schools as well, because it is that education, and it can't be stressed enough, that provides the constant stream of physicians, health professionals, advanced educators, architects, business leaders, religious leaders, lawyers, government officials, and others. It's that education that depends most of all on research, and that leads in so many ways to the leadership in so many fields throughout the country as a whole. It depends on a creative, inquiring faculty of absolutely the highest caliber. Without such a faculty and without support for its research, neither Harvard nor any other university can carry out its fundamental mission or achieve its own goals or those of society. Research and advanced education and undergraduate education are inescapably linked to one another. Neither can flourish without the other. I want to stress this today only because we've reached what I regard as a critical turning point in our nation's commitment to the creation of important knowledge and understanding, new knowledge and understanding. Decisions now being made by the federal government, inevitably because they must grapple with a budget, but the decisions in any way will have a profound effect on the future of research and education in this country. The stakes are very high, and the issues are not receiving the urgent and widespread attention they deserve, because this is certainly the most hazardous moment with respect to federal support for higher education in this country during the entire post-war period. In the 50 years since Alexander Fleming spoke that day at Harvard, it's no exaggeration to say basic research at our universities has done much to transform the world in which we live. Remember, for instance, the discovery of the structure of DNA, 1953, which has increased our understanding of almost every aspect of our biological nature, which began the revolution in genetics and which led to the creation of the entire new industry of biotechnology. Remember the computer revolution, the ways in which it has changed how we learn, how we transmit and access information, how we solve problems that were previously thought to be insoluble. Or think about microwaves, plastics, new materials, optical fibers, laser discs, superconductors, weather and communication satellites, all kinds of other devices and materials that have become so much of our daily lives that we scarcely even notice them anymore and take them for granted and forget that they were the products of creative research and technology. Or think of the advances in understanding cancer, heart disease, and other illnesses, including mental illnesses. Think how much has been accomplished, but also how much more work in health there is still to be done. So how we travel, how we communicate, what we eat, what we do with our free time, how we protect our environment, how we make a living, all these aspects of our lives have increasingly come to be more dependent in essential ways on the discoveries that flow from basic and applied research. And the driving study behind this steady advance has been, as I suggested, the cooperation for a full half-century and more between the universities and the federal government. The joint enterprise has been based on a single premise that was spelled out in another famous document whose 50th anniversary we're also marking this year, the report titled Science, the Endless Frontier. Its author, Vannevar Bush, who also received an honorary Harvard degree in 1941, and also was the principal speaker at that commencement. Bush wrote, "Progress in the war against disease depends upon a flow of new scientific knowledge. New products, new industries, more jobs require continuous additions to knowledge and the application of that knowledge to the practical purposes of the world. Science provides no panacea for individual, social, and economic ills," he continued, "but without scientific progress, no amount of achievement in other directions can ensure our health, our economic prosperity, our security as a nation in this particularly complicated modern world." These words are no less true now than they were 50 years ago, but the national mood has changed, and certainly our sense of perspective has changed. Today, we are simply more skeptical as a nation about institutions and what can be achieved. As a society, we have much less patience for long-term investments and long-range solutions. In fact, we have less patience for so many things that require patience. It's true, in addition, that financial resources at our disposal are much more constrained, and we face difficult choices about how to spend those resources. In such a climate, basic research, which has no broad, no obvious constituency in our national politics, basic research, applied research, and the education that depends on it finds itself very seriously at risk. The scientists can spend weeks, months, even years studying the genetic makeup, for example, in this case, of baker's yeast, of all things. It sounds completely irrelevant and seems at first to be an easy target for ridicule. Later, we find out that the results of this work will help pave the way for a breakthrough in understanding the basis of colon cancer. A team of physicists studies how protons shift energy levels inside of nuclei of atoms, not something most of us worry about every day of our lives. But years later, the work leads to magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, an astonishingly precise tool that allows us to picture and study normal and abnormal structures inside the human body. And with that imaging device, we can now watch parts of the brain and other organs in action and begin to diagnose many diseases in ways that we could scarcely have predicted years and years ago. These are only one or two small examples out of thousands of possible examples illustrating what has been accomplished in the last half-century, thanks to our national conviction that discovery and increased understanding will lead us to real and tangible benefits of many kinds for all of us. Now, at a time when our ability to solve increasingly complicated problems, global, in the economy, in international affairs, in health, in ethnic relations and conflict, in technology, when all that depends so much on intelligent leadership, on educated people who can analyze and act, on research that it can illuminate patterns in our behavior and in international behavior, or can illuminate the deepest puzzles in nature, at such a time, we can't afford to give up on the basic commitments and investments that have been so much a source of our collective strength, human and economic, over so many years. The question many people are asking today is whether we can afford to make such investments in research and education. This is, now and always, an essential question to ask and to keep before us because it constantly needs difficult evaluation. But the other question we have to ask as we look to the future of a society is whether we can afford not to make such investments, because we dare not underestimate the dangers, even if they are not immediately apparent, if we fail to. If, for instance, the enterprise of basic science is seriously damaged at the National Institutes of Health or the National Science Foundation and other agencies, we may not see or feel the most profound effects either today or tomorrow or next year. After all, it has taken fully 40 years and more since the discovery of the structure of DNA to begin to realize what it will finally yield in terms of medical, social, and other economic benefits. So we may well persuade ourselves into thinking that today's budget cuts will really have no profound impact, but that would be a very great mistake. The total impact will be felt later, in a decade or even two, and then it will be too late to turn the clock immediately back, and it will cost a very great deal more to rebuild something. As we know, it always takes much, much more to rebuild something that has fallen apart than it is to keep something that is in good condition, in good repair. Many people, let me say, in the Congress and the executive branch understand this. Many people there have been working hard, helping to follow the thoughtful, careful approach that we need as we try to trim our budget nationally. And they've done this courageously and with some real effect. The effort is bipartisan, and it is continuous. But our many leaders in Congress who want to help need to know that the rest of us care too, and that we also want to help. They cannot, in the current national situation, manage this entire formidable job on their own. With them, we ought to remember another of Alexander Fleming's remarks 50 years ago. The unprepared mind, he said, cannot see the outstretched hand of opportunity. Curiosity alone won't produce new knowledge. Fortuity and chance and serendipity alone will not produce new knowledge. Significant new knowledge depends instead on the rigorous work, the patient work, and the imagination of prepared minds. It depends on excellent education. It depends on a climate of free inquiry in which individuals have the flexibility and the support that they need to follow their deepest insights and intuitions in discovering the knowledge about human nature and the natural world that we need. Well, let me, in closing, remember one other thing that I've already mentioned about Fleming. He almost didn't make it to medical school. That small legacy from a relative happened to come his way. But that's not the sort of thing we can depend upon for everybody every day. Without financial help, we might never well have heard about Fleming, and we might never have had the benefit of his own prepared mind. In the years since World War II, though we sometimes forget this fact, higher American education has become much more accessible than ever before. Our society's conviction about the importance of educational opportunity, as expressed in our public policy and a constant generosity of so many individuals and donors to this university and others, that conviction has steadily opened doors to women and men of talent and energy from all backgrounds, all walks of life, even when their financial means were very, very modest indeed. The commitment to provide financial aid to students in need, the commitment to openness and inclusiveness in our colleges and universities has been one of the defining achievements of American society, and indeed any society, anywhere, since that war 50 years ago. For instance, the Harvard class of 1945 included the first Harvard graduates ever supported by scholarships under the GI Bill of Rights, one of the great steps forward in expanding access to American higher education. In the following decades, we've seen broader efforts to open the doors of our colleges and universities to others. And here, as in the case of scientific research, the key to progress has been a powerful partnership between educational institutions and the government, as well as generous private donors and, of course, the students and families themselves. Here, too, we are at a major crossroads. There are proposals on the table in Washington that would turn back the clock here, too, in significant ways. There are deeply troubling signs that an immensely productive investment in financial aid and access to education for all young people is in increasing danger. For instance, the idea of beginning to charge interest on student loans from the very moment a student enrolls as a first-year student in college would, if adopted, add, because that loan interest rolls up very significantly and very fast, add very substantially to student debt, not only for undergraduates, but for graduate students and for the accumulation of both together. The proposals to freeze or cut back campus aid programs such as work-study, where students do volunteer work for modest pay in order to help work their way through college, or to freeze the Pell Grant program, are no less disturbing proposals. Now, we can't, of course, pay for everything. We have to make choices, and higher education cannot be exempted. The only plea here is to make them thoughtfully, to do it slowly, and to be careful that we do not damage and destroy things that we have built up so carefully and so well over so many decades. We can't let the worst reversals take place. President Conant told us when he spoke here 50 years ago, he said, "Broad access to education is the great instrument created by American democracy to secure the foundations of a republic of free people." He remembered, in addition, the many Harvard alumni who had given their lives to secure that freedom, and he pledged that we would honor their sacrifice. We would work harder, even in times of peace, to serve society by continuing to advance knowledge, by keeping the doors of educational opportunity open to everyone. So at this moment, let's not turn our backs on that pledge. For all our sakes and for the health of the nation, let's help the Congress help everyone. We've made good on our shared commitment to education year after year, decade after decade, for 50 years. Let's not falter now. Honored guests, graduates, family, friends, I want to ask you to join me now in a special tribute paid to the Harvard women and men who gave so much of themselves, and especially the many who gave their lives in the cause of freedom during the Second World War and in later wars. I ask you to join me in honoring the class of 1945, celebrating its 50th reunion today, and the class of 1970, celebrating its 25th, two classes who experienced in different ways two very different wars, but who are brought together under the aegis of this wonderful university as total classmates, if you will, across generations, uniting and helping to unite all of us in memory, in sorrow, but also in honor and in celebration. We will do this in a traditional way, yet it's only observed infrequently, by observing moments of silence as the bell of Memorial Church tolls. Giving our memory and our thanks, I ask you to stand.
Thank you very much, President Rudenstein. We thank you not only for your remarks today, but for your continued strong, intelligent, and sensitive leadership. Thank you. Please rise and join in the singing of Radcliffe, "Now We Rise to Greet Thee." I've been given another very difficult task, and that is to introduce our speaker, the President of the Czech Republic. The task is difficult only because I've been given the materials that are essentially identical to what was presented this morning. However, my dilemma was solved at lunch when someone suggested that a Harvard group could benefit from hearing something twice. Václav Havel was born in Prague in 1936, and early in life he worked as a chemical laboratory technician, studied economics, and completed his compulsory military service. He then started the first of his numerous successful pursuits. He was a stagehand at the ABC Theater in Prague, and later a stagehand and assistant director at Prague's theater on the Balustrade. He produced his first plays there, including his first major international success, The Garden Party, in 1963. In 1964, he married Olga. He was active in the democratization and renewal of culture during the era of reforms known as the Prague Spring. This era ended with the Warsaw Pact invasion in August of 1968. Václav Havel actively opposed the invasion. His work was banned in Czechoslovakia in 1969, and he was forced to move from Prague to the country where he concentrated on his writing. In 1975, he wrote an open letter to President Husak, openly criticizing the government. He became, in 1977, a co-founder and one of the first 3 spokesmen of the Charter 77 Human Rights Initiative. He also was a member of the Committee for the Defense of the Unjustly Persecuted, which was founded by a group of the signatories of Charter 77. From 1978 to 1979, he was under house arrest, during which time he wrote one of his most influential essays, The Power of the Powerless. He was again in prison from 79 to 83. But as President Rudenstein has remarked about President Havel's life, despite his numerous imprisonments, the words keep coming. Václav Havel wrote 3 of his major plays during that period: Largo Desolado, 1984, Temptation in 1985, and Slum Clearance in 1987. He was again incarcerated, the last time from January to May 1989. In November '89, he became one of the leaders of the Civic Forum opposition, which helped bring about the end of communist rule. Later in that year, he was elected president of the Federated Czechoslovakia. And as was said, after the June 1992 parliamentary elections, it became clear that the Federation was heading for dissolution, and Václav Havel resigned from the federal presidency on June 20th. On January 26, 1993, Václav Havel was elected the first president of the Czech Republic. The President has asked me to mention that he will give his remarks in English. He wanted me to apologize because of his English. It will take slightly longer. I told him we were not interested in his English, we're interested in his words and what he had to say, and we welcome you, sir.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, one evening not long ago, I was sitting in an outdoor restaurant by the water. My chair was almost identical to the chairs they have in restaurants by the Vltava River in Prague. They were playing the same rock music they play in most Czech restaurants. I saw advertisements I am familiar with back home. Above all, I was surrounded by young people who were similarly dressed, who drank familiar-looking drinks, and who behaved as casually as their contemporaries in Prague. Only their complexion and their facial features were different, for I was in Singapore. I sat there thinking about this, and again, for the umpteenth time, I realized an almost banal truth, that we now live in a single global civilization. The identity of this civilization does not lie merely in similar forms of dress or similar drinks or in the constant buzz of the same commercial music all around the world or even in international advertising. It lies in something deeper. Thanks to the modern idea of constant progress, with its inherent expansionism, and to the rapid evolution of science that comes directly from it, our planet has, for the first time in the long history of the human race, been covered in the space of a very few decades by a single civilization, one that is essentially technological. The world is now enmeshed in webs of telecommunication networks consisting of millions of tiny threads or capillaries that not only transmit information of all kinds at lightning speed, but also convey integrated models of social, political, and economic behavior. They are conduits for legal norms as well as for billions and billions of dollars crisscrossing the world while remaining invisible even to those who deal directly with them. The life of the human race is completely interconnected, not only in the informational sense, but in the causal sense as well. Anecdotically, I could illustrate this by reminding you, since I've already mentioned Singapore, that today all it takes is a single shady transaction initiated by a single devious bank clerk in Singapore to bring down a bank on the other side of the world. Thanks to the accomplishments of this civilization, practically all of us know what checks, bonds, bills of exchange, and stocks are. We are familiar with CNN and Chernobyl, and we know who the Rolling Stones or Nelson Mandela or Salman Rushdie are. More than that, the capillaries that have so radically integrated this civilization also convey information about certain modes of human coexistence that have proven their worth, like democracy, respect for human rights, the rule of law, the laws of the marketplace. Such information flows around the world and, in varying degrees, takes root in different places. In modern times, this global civilization emerged in the territory occupied by European and ultimately by Euro-American culture. Historically, it evolved from a combination of traditions, classical, Judaic, and Christian. In theory, at least, it gives people not only the capacity for worldwide communication, but also a coordinated means of defending themselves against many common dangers. It can also, in an unprecedented way, make our life on this earth easier and open up to us hitherto unexplored horizons in our knowledge of ourselves and the world we live in. And yet, there is something not quite right about it. Allow me to use this ceremonial gathering for a brief meditation on a subject which I have dwelt upon a great deal and which I often bring up on occasions resembling this one. I want to focus today on the source of the dangers that threaten humanity in spite of this global civilization and often directly because of it. Above all, I would like to speak about the ways in which these dangers can be confronted. Many of the great problems we face today, as far as I understand them, have their origin in the fact that this global civilization, though in evidence everywhere, is no more than a thin veneer over the sum total of human awareness, if I may put it that way. This civilization is immensely fresh, young, new, and fragile, and the humanity spirit has accepted it with dizzying alacrity without itself changing in any essential way. Humanity has evolved over long millennia in all manner of civilizations and cultures that gradually and in very diverse ways shaped our habits of mind, our relationship to the world, our models of behavior, and the values we accept and recognize. In a sense, this new single epidermis of world civilization merely covers or conceals the immense variety of cultures, of peoples, of religious worlds, of historical traditions, and historically formed attitudes, all of which, in a sense, lie beneath it. At the same time, even as the veneer of world civilization expands, this underside of humanity, this hidden dimension of it, demands more and more clearly to be heard and to be granted a right to life. And thus, while the world as a whole increasingly accepts the new habits of global civilization, another contradictory process is taking place. Ancient traditions are reviving, different religions and cultures are awakening to new ways of being, seeking new room to exist, and struggling with growing fervor to realize what is unique to them and what makes them different from others. Ultimately, they seek to give their individuality a political expression. It is often said that in our time, every valley cries out for its own independence or will even fight for it. Many nations, or parts of them at least, are struggling against modern civilization or its main proponents for the right to worship their ancient gods and obey the ancient divine injunctions. They carry on their struggle using weapons provided by the very civilization they oppose. They employ radar, computers, lasers, nerve gases, and perhaps in the future even nuclear weapons, all products of the world they challenge to help defend their ancient heritage against the erosions of modern civilization. In contrast with these technological inventions, other products of this civilization, like democracy or the idea of human rights, are not accepted in many places in the world because they are deemed to be hostile to local traditions. In other words, the Euro-American world has equipped other parts of the globe with instruments that not only could effectively destroy the Enlightenment values which, among other things, made possible the invention of precisely these instruments, but which could well cripple the capacity of people to live together on this earth. What follows from all of this? It is my belief that this state of affairs contains a clear challenge not only to the Euro-American world, but to our present-day civilization as a whole. It is a challenge to this civilization to start understanding itself as a multicultural and multipolar civilization whose meaning lies not in undermining the individuality of different spheres of culture and civilization, but in allowing them to be more completely themselves. This will only be possible, even conceivable, if we all accept a basic code of mutual coexistence, a kind of common minimum we can all share, one that will enable us to go on live side by side. Yet, such a code won't stand a chance if it is merely the product of a few who then proceed to force it on the rest. It must be an expression of the authentic will of everyone, growing out of the genuine spiritual roots hidden beneath the skin of our common global civilization. If it is merely disseminated through the capillaries of this skin, the way Coca-Cola ads are, as a commodity offered by some to others, such a code can hardly be expected to take hold in any profound or universal way. But is humanity capable to such an undertaking? Is it not a hopelessly utopian idea? Haven't we so lost control of our destiny that we are condemned to gradual extinction in ever harsher high-tech clashes between cultures because of our fatal inability to cooperate in the face of impending catastrophes, be they ecological, social, or demographic, or of dangers generated by the state of our civilization as such? I don't know. but I have not lost hope. I have not lost hope because I am persuaded again and again that lying dormant in the deepest roots of most, if not all, cultures, there is an essential similarity, something that could be made, if the will to do so existed, a genuinely unifying starting point for that new code of human coexistence that would be firmly anchored in the great diversity of human traditions. Don't we find somewhere in the foundations of most religions and cultures, though they may take 1,001 distinct forms, common elements such as respect for what transcends us, whether we mean the mystery of being or a moral order that stands above us, certain imperatives that come to us from heaven or from nature or from our own hearts, a belief that our deeds will live after us, respect for our neighbors, for our families, for certain natural authorities, respect for human dignity and for nature, a sense of solidarity and benevolence towards guests who come with good intentions. Isn't the common ancient origin of human roots of our diverse spiritualities, each of which is merely another kind of human understanding of the same reality, the thing that can genuinely bring people of different cultures together? And aren't the basic commandments of this archetypal spirituality in harmony with what even an unreligious person, without knowing exactly why, may consider proper and meaningful? Naturally, I am not suggesting that modern people be compelled to worship ancient deities and accept rituals they have long since abandoned. I am suggesting something quite different. We must come to understand the deep mutual connection or kinship between the various forms of our spirituality. We must recollect our original spiritual and moral substance, which grew out of the same essential experience of humanity. I believe that this is the only way to achieve a genuine renewal of our sense of responsibility for ourselves and for the world. And at the same time, it is the only way to achieve a deeper understanding among cultures, what will enable them to work together in a truly ecumenical way to create a new order for the world. The veneer of global civilization that envelops the modern world and the consciousness of humanity, as we all know, has a dual nature, bringing into question at every step of the way the very values it is based upon or which it is propagates. The thousands of marvelous achievements of this civilization that work for us so well and enrich us can equally impoverish, diminish, and destroy our lives, and frequently do. Instead of serving people, many of these creations enslave them. Instead of helping people to develop their identities, they take them away. Almost every invention or discovery, from the splitting of the atom and the discovery of DNA to television and the computer, can be turned against us and used to our detriment. How much easier it is today than it was during the First World War to destroy an entire metropolis in a single air raid. And how much easier would it be today, in the era of television, for a madman like Hitler or Stalin to pervert the spirit of a whole nation? When have people ever had the power we now possess to alter the climate of the planet or deplete its mineral resources or the wealth of its fauna and flora in the space of a few short decades? And how much more destructive potential do terrorists have at their disposal today than at the beginning of this century? In our era, it would seem that one part of the human brain, the rational part, which has made all these morally neutral discoveries, has undergone exceptional development, while the other part, which should be alert to ensure that these discoveries really serve humanity and will not destroy it, has lagged behind catastrophically. Yes, regardless of where I begin my thinking about the problems facing our civilization, I always return to the theme of human responsibility, which seems incapable of keeping pace with civilization and preventing it from turning against the human race. It's as though the world has simply become too much for us to deal with. There is no way back. Only a dreamer can believe that the solution lies in curtailing the progress of civilization in some way or other. The main task in the coming era is something else, a radical renewal of our sense of responsibility. Our conscience must catch up to our reason, otherwise we are lost. It is my profound belief that there is only one way to achieve this. We must divest ourselves of our egoistical anthropocentrism, our habit of seeing ourselves as masters of the universe who can do whatever occurs to us. We must discover a new respect for what transcends us, for the universe, for the earth, for nature, for life, and for reality. Our respect for other people, for other nations, and for other cultures can only grow from a humble respect for the cosmic order and from an awareness that we are a part of it, that we share in it, and that nothing of what we do is lost, but rather becomes part of the eternal memory of being where it is judged. A better alternative for the future of humanity, therefore, clearly lies in imbuing our civilization with a spiritual dimension. It's not just a matter of understanding its multicultural nature and finding inspiration for the creation of a new world order in the common roots of all cultures. It is also essential that the Euro-American cultural sphere, the one which created this civilization and taught humanity its destructive pride, now return to its own spiritual roots and become an example to the rest of the world in the search for a new humanity. General observations of this type are certainly not difficult to make, nor are they new or revolutionary. Modern people are masters at describing the crisis and the misery of the world which we shape and for which we are responsible. We are much less adept to putting things right. So, what specifically is to be done? I do not believe in some universal key or panacea. I am not an advocate of what Karl Popper called holistic social engineering, particularly because I had to live most of my adult life in circumstances that resulted from an attempt to create a holistic Marxist utopia. I know more than enough, therefore, about efforts of this kind. This does not relieve me, however, of the responsibility to think of ways to make the world better. It will certainly not be easy to awaken in people a new sense of responsibility for the world, an ability to conduct themselves as if they were to live on this earth forever, and to be held answerable for its condition on one day. Who knows how many horrific cataclysms humanity may have to go through before such a sense of responsibility is generally accepted. But this does not mean that those who wish to work for it cannot begin at once. It is a great task for teachers, educators, intellectuals, the clergy, artists, entrepreneurs, journalists, people active in all forms of public life. Above all, it is a task for politicians. Even in the most democratic of conditions, politicians have immense influence, perhaps more than they themselves realize. This influence does not lie in their actual mandates, which in any case are considerably limited. It lies in something else, in the spontaneous impact their charisma has on the public. The main task of the present generation of politicians is not, I think, to ingratiate themselves with the public through the decisions they take or their smiles on television. It is not to go on winning elections and ensuring themselves a place in the sun till the end of their days. Their role is something quite different: to assume their share of responsibility for the long-range prospects of our world, and thus to set an example for the public in whose side they work. Their responsibility is Their responsibility is to think ahead boldly, not to fear the disfavor of the crowd, to imbue their actions with a spiritual dimension, which of course is not the same thing as ostentatious attendance at religious services, to explain again and again, both to the public and to their colleagues, that politics must do far more than reflect the interests of particular groups or lobbies. After all, politics is a matter of serving the community, which means that it is morality in practice. And how better to serve the community and practice morality than be seeking in the midst of the global and globally threatened civilization their own global political responsibility. That is their responsibility for the very survival of the human race. I don't believe that a politician who sets out on this risky path will inevitably jeopardize his or her political survival. This is a wrong-headed notion which assumes that the citizen is a fool and that political success depends on playing to this folly. That is not the way it is. A conscience slumbers in every human being, something divine, and that is what we have to put our trust in. Ladies and gentlemen, I find myself at perhaps the most famous university in the most powerful country in the world. With your permission, I will say a few words on the subject of the politics of a great power. It is obvious that those who have the greatest power and influence also bear the greatest responsibility. Like it or not, the United States of America now bears probably the greatest responsibility for the direction our world will take. The United States, therefore, should reflect most deeply on this responsibility. Isolationism has never paid off to the United States. Had it entered the First World War earlier, perhaps it would not have had to pay with anything like the casualties it actually incurred. The same is true of the Second World War. When Hitler was getting ready to invade Czechoslovakia, and in so doing, finally exposed the lack of courage on the part of the Western democracies, your president wrote a letter to the Czechoslovak president imploring him to come to some agreement with Hitler. Had he not deceived himself and the whole world into believing that an agreement could be made with this madman, had he instead shown a few teeth, perhaps the Second World War need not have happened, and tens of thousands of young Americans need not have died fighting in it. Likewise, just before the end of that war, had your president, who was otherwise an outstanding man, said a clear no to Stalin's decision to divide the world, perhaps the Cold War, which cost the United States hundreds of billions of dollars, need not have happened either. I beg you, do not repeat these mistakes. You yourselves have always paid a heavy price for them. There is simply no escaping the responsibility you have as the most powerful country in the world. There is far more at stake here than simply standing up to those who would like once again to divide the world into spheres of interests or subjugate others who are different from them and weaker. What is now at stake is saving the human race. In other words, it's a question of what I've already taught about, of understanding modern civilization as a multicultural and multipolar civilization, of turning our attention to the original spiritual sources of human culture, and above all, of our own culture, of drawing from these sources the strength for a courageous and magnanimous creation of a new order for the world. Not long ago, I was at a gala dinner to mark an important anniversary. There were 50 heads of state present, perhaps more, who came to honor the heroes and victims of the greatest war in human history. This was not a political conference, but the kind of social event that is meant principally to show hospitality and respect to the invited guests. When the sitting plan was given out, I discovered to my surprise that those sitting at the table next to mine were not identified simply as representatives of a particular state, as was the case with all the other tables. They were referred to as permanent members of the UN Security Council and the G7. I had mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, I thought how marvelous that the richest and most powerful of this world see each other often, and even at this dinner can talk informally and get to know each other better. On the other hand, a slight chill went down my spine, for I could not help observing that one table had been singled out as being special and particularly important. It was a table for the big powers. Somewhat perversely, I began to imagine that the people sitting at it were, along with their Russian caviar, dividing the rest of us up among themselves without asking our opinion. Perhaps all this is merely the whimsy of a former and perhaps future playwright. But I wanted to express it here for one simple reason: to emphasize the terrible gap that exists between the responsibility of the great powers and their hubris. The architect of that sitting arrangement, I should think it was none of the attending presidents, was not guided by a sense of responsibility for the world, but by the banal pride of the powerful. But pride is precisely what will lead the world to hell. I am suggesting an alternative, humbly accepting our responsibility for the world. There is one great opportunity in the matter of coexistence between nations and spheres of civilization, culture and religion that should be grasped and exploited to the limit. This is the appearance of supranational or regional communities. By now, there are many such communities in the world with diverse characteristics and differing degrees of integration. I believe in this approach. I believe in the importance of organisms that lie somewhere between nation states and a world community, organisms that can be an important medium of global communication and cooperation. I believe that this trend towards integration in a world where, as I've said, every valley longs for independence must be given the greatest possible support. These organisms, however, must not be an expression of integration merely for the sake of integration. They must be one of the many instruments enabling each region, each nation to be both itself and capable to cooperation with others. That is, they must be one of the instruments enabling countries and peoples who are close to each other geographically, ethnically, culturally, and economically, and who have common security interests, to form associations and better communicate with each other and with the rest of the world. At the same time, all such regional communities must rid themselves of fear that other-like communities are directed against them. Regional groupings in areas that have common traditions and a common political culture ought to be a natural part of the complex political architecture of the world. Cooperation between such regions ought to be a natural component of cooperation on a worldwide scale. As long as the broadening of NATO membership to include countries who feel culturally and politically a part of the region the alliance was created to defend, is seen by Russia, for example, as an anti-Russian undertaking, it will be a sign that Russia has not yet understood the challenge of this era. The most important world organization is the United Nations. I think that the 50th anniversary of its birth could be an occasion to reflect on how to infuse it with a new ethos, a new strength, and a new meaning, and make it the truly most important arena of good cooperation among all cultures that make up our planetary civilization. But neither the strengthening of regional structures nor the strengthening of the UN will save the world if both processes are not informed by that renewed spiritual charge, which I see as the only hope that the human race will survive another millennium. I have touched on what I think politicians should do. There is, however, one more force that has at least as much, if not more, influence on the general state of minds as politicians do. That force is the mass media. Only when fate sent me into the realm of high politics did I become fully aware of the media's double-edged power. Their dual impact is not a specialty of the media. It is merely a part or an expression of the dual nature of today's civilization, of which I have already spoken. Thanks to television, the whole world discovered in the course of an evening that there is a country called Rwanda where people are suffering beyond belief. Thanks to television, it is possible to do at least a little to help those who are suffering. Thanks to television, the whole world, in the course of a few seconds, was shocked and horrified about what happened in Oklahoma City, and at the same time understood it as a great warning for all. Thanks to television, the whole world knows that there exists an internationally recognized country called Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that from the moment it recognized this country, the international community has tried unsuccessfully to divide it into grotesque mini-states according to the wishes of warlords who have never been recognized by anyone as anyone's legitimate representatives. That is the wonderful side of today's mass media, or rather of those who gather the news. Humanity's thanks belong to all those courageous reporters who voluntarily risk their lives wherever something evil is happening in order to arouse the conscience of the world. There is, however, another less wonderful aspect of television, one that merely revolves in the horrors of the world or unforgivably makes them commonplace or compels politicians to become first of all television stars. But where is it written that someone who is good on television is necessarily also a good politician? I never fail to be astonished at how much I am at the mercy of television directors and editors, at how my public image depends far more on them than it does on myself, at how important it is to smile appropriately on television or choose the right tie, at how television forces me to express my thoughts as spirally as possible in witticism, slogans, or sound bites, at how easily my television image can be made to seem different from the real me. I am astonished by this, and at the same time I fear it serves no good purpose. I know politicians who have learned to see themselves only as the television camera does. Television has those appropriated their personalities and made them into something like television shadows of their former selves. I sometimes wonder whether they even sleep in a way that will look good on television. I am not outraged with television or the press for distorting what I say or ignoring it or editing me to appear like some strange monster. I am not angry with the media when I see that a politician's rise or fall often depends more on them than on the politician concerned. What interests me is something else. The responsibility of those who have the mass media in their hands. They too bear responsibility for the world and for the future of humanity. Just as the splitting of the atom can immensely enrich humanity in 1,001 ways and at the same time can also threaten it with destruction, So television can have both good and evil consequences. Quickly, suggestively, and to an unprecedented degree, it can disseminate the spirit of understanding, humanity, human solidarity, and spirituality, or it can stupefy whole nations and continents. And just as our use of atomic energy depends solely on our sense of responsibility, so the proper use of television's power to enter practically every household and every human mind depends on our sense of responsibility as well. Whether our world is to be saved from everything that threatens it today depends above all on whether human beings come to their senses, whether they understand the degree of their responsibility and discover a new relationship to the very miracle of being. The world is in the hands of us all, and yet some have a greater influence on its fate than others. The more influence a person has, be they politician or television announcer, the greater the demands placed on their sense of responsibility, and the less they should think merely about personal interests. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, allow me a brief personal remark. I was born in Prague and I lived there for decades without being allowed to study properly or visit other countries. Nevertheless, my mother never abandoned one of her secret and quite extravagant dreams, that one day I would study at Harvard. Fate did not permit me to fulfill her dream, but something else happened, something that would never have occurred even to my mother. I have received a doctoral degree at Harvard without even having to study here. More than that, I have been given to see Singapore and countless other exotic places. I have been given to understand how small this world is and how it torments itself with countless things it need not torment itself with. If people could find within themselves a little more courage, a little more hope, a little more responsibility, a little more mutual understanding and love. I don't know whether my mother is looking down at me from heaven, but if she is, I can guess what she's probably thinking. She's thinking that I'm sticking my nose into matters that only people who have properly studied political science at Harvard have the right to stick their noses into. I hope that you don't think so. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As we conclude, I would like you to please stand and join me as we sing Fair Harvard. The words are included in your program. Thank you. Thank you, alumni, friends, and guests, for joining in the 1995 meeting of the Harvard Alumni Association. I hereby adjourn this meeting until June 6, 1996.